Good morning, students. Now going to the mechanism of stomatal movement. The stomatal movement is also different ways of the mechanism. That different way, that means starch sugar hypothesis or potassium photosynthesis, Stewart Sally theory. These are the different types of the movements of the ions. So most of the movements of the ions, then whenever the high amount of the ions is completely present in different type of the pressure, that is the potential pressure, the ions is transported to the low level to high level. Then the water is most present in the leaves. The complete has in the different type of the leaves. So here starch sugar hypothesis, that means here then the example, the most of the tomatoes, then the sugar that the ions is in the mostly it has in the that type of gourd cells. The gourd cells may have chloroplast with sugars. Okay, right now. Chloroplast with sugars having gourd cells. Then this type of the gourd cells, they have most of the chloroplast is present, as well as then the photosynthesis, that means it has in the starches. Then convert into the sugar is convert into the starches. Then different type of the sucrose or fructose. We can find out all primary. We can further product, that means water. It's used to the different type of the carbohydrates. Then water, it may be utilized to the sunlight. It's used to the different type of the glucoses, starches. That is the involvement of the water with sugars. Then the sugar molecules is completely synthesized by the starches. Okay. Then right now, then it completely then the sugars is produced or dissolved in water. They can we have to find out the our that means potential. Then it's complete then the negative kind of the potential. Negativity potential, we can pressure or potential, manual potential, mechanical potential. So here water, it's in water at the same time sugar is synthesized by the mechanical and at the same time water molecule and the sugar. Both are is also chemical compounds. The water, that means two moles of the hydrogens, 1 mole of the oxygen. So it is the chemical reaction. So here then the potential also, water potential, that means it is chemical and mechanical, both potentials is also utilized in the final products. That is completely in negative type of the final product. Then here the subsidiary cells, that gourd cells, these all complete involved in the increase of the pressures. Then that pressures is the most of the gourd cells, they have the sugars at complete pressure. They can find out the chemical pressure. Then the pressures will be goes to the that is the tomatoes is open. Then whenever the pressure is without the pressure, that tomatoes will be closed, because here in before previous class I had already told that is the photosynthesis, autotrophic type of the plants. The plants completely utilize the water and sunlight. They can make it their own food material. That is the photosynthesis. So here whenever the utilize the sunlight or the reactions will be go to the pores, that is that when it's complete happen in open. So that is the starch opened of the pore, these starches is make up only. That the tomato, whenever the open the tomato, the starches completely this or the sugars is converted to the starches or molecules. That is the different type of then the things. The it has in the it complete then the starches. Sugars is completed starches. That is the mechanical potential. We can pressure here mechanical potential. Then starch is the starches are dissolved or not? They don't dissolve. They are not dissolved in water. Already we are experiment already. We prove the experiments in second semester. I think the third semester. That means pollination, pollen germination. Then sucrose and starch both are in. We can separate of the petri dishes. Some starch molecules or starch powder, and we can pour in that water. At the same time, we can sprinkle out the pollens. Pollen germination we have to use into that type of experiment. At the same time, already we find and remember it. Then it are not a dissolved starches. Okay. Then the starch does not dissolve in water. So it has because of it has completely negative potential energy. Okay. The starch it has negative potential energy. Then the water is transfer complete enter the subsidiary cells and guard cells. It contact the complete stomata or closed in this or the difficult. Then that means here the stomata is closed. Then that the pore is closed. In before the pore is closed, then these all molecules are transferred into the guard cells. Then whenever they are in guard cells, then in one example, pore is closed, then automatically then guard cells to transfer into the starches subsidiary cells. That means the stomatos is completely transferred to the starches. Then the sugars that it has in the sugars molecules transfer into the this type of the guard cells. Then here it is the sugar molecule. These are transferred to the that means subsidiary cells. Then these sugars is transferred into the subsidiary cells. So sometimes it is transferred to the, that is when the starch that has completely, then in case this one is the closed type of stomato. Then for example closed type of stomato. So this one is the closed type of cells. So these closed type of subsidiary cells, then automatic this starch is completely involved to the guard cells. The starch is involved to the subsidiary cells, guard cells to subsidiary cells. Then this is the closed. Here open stomatos. At the same time closed stomatos. Here the two variations, that is the open stomato, that means it mostly in daytime. Open stomato we can observe daytime. Closed stomato night time. Then that is the starch and sugar hypothesis. Then both are ways. This subsidiary cells to guard cells to subsidiary cells. So both ways of the cells. That is the starch sugar hypothesis theory. Then potassium ion transport, that is it completely metal or mechanical ion. Then it is in use of the malic acid type of. Then that means potassium chloride or potassium hydroxide, potassium iodide. most of the stomato is open with the God cells, they have the more of the potassium ion concentrations. Whenever it has open stomato, it most over the ions in potassium ions. Okay. Then this potassium ions is completely in combination with the potassium chloride or potassium hydroxide. Then combination with negative charge. They have the combination with the negative charge. Then the complete of the mallet type of the ions or God cells tomato. It has open. Then the potassium ion enter from completely subsidiary cells to God cells. Okay. Then that means it has in the presence of the light. Whenever they have presence of the light, the potassium ion enter from the subsidiary cells to God cells. For where the subsidiary cells? These are the subsidiary cells. So, whenever the sunlight, that is the open stomata, the pore will be open, the pore is open, then the subsidiary cells to potassium ions transfer into the, for example, the subsidiary cells, the potassium ions transfer into the God cells, K plus. Okay, you can now this way to this place to this place, that is the God subsidiary cells to God cells. Then the convert of some types of the starches, different type of the starches or sugars as result of its involving the pressure, that is the different type of the increasing levels of the ions. So then for example, negative kind of ions, chloride ions, then the enter the God cells. Then chloride ions is also enter the God cells. Then whenever the chloride ions enter the God cells, they can synthesize. That means they can split into the hydrogen molecules. That is the hydrogen ion mallet. It has in diffuse or it is completely potassium plus chloride minus ions. It has in different types of the subsidiary cells from God cells. Then God cells does not dissolve in water. That is the potassium. It has the negative charges. Then the potassium is not dissolved in the water. So these that kind of the variation, that is the it's completed stomatal. Whenever the stomatal is closed, then difficult of the chlorides and sugars or different type of the molecules are also involved or chlorides ions. Then it has completely split out. Then whenever it has in the closure of the stomato, that is the these are not dissolved. That's why then the God cells complete has used to the God cells to the subsidiary cells irreversibly. Then also potassium also it's used to the subsidiary cells. Then it's going to different type of the ways. That is the potassium ion transport. Then the photosynthesis God cells. These different type of the opening and closing type of the stomatos to put on a photosynthesis activity God cells. It can completely present in the chloroplast. That chloroplast it has the values of the performance in the God cells to the subsidiary cells. Then this of the increasing of the sap ascent absorb, that means transpirations of the water. Then water transport ions. It has reached into the one cell to another cell. Then the light completely absents. They change their automatic variation. Then that is the God cells diffuse into the subsidiary cells. Then again it has connect with the, then that means a different type of the carbohydrate carbon dioxide is also involved into the photosynthesis way. Then here the God cells does not make any kind of the particles, that is in the photosynthesis way. It has because of it has in the different ways of the photosynthesis ways. That means most of in this way, that is the difficult because of the whenever involve the carbon dioxide in stoma, closed stoma, that is the reason. Then Stewart theory. Then again Stewart theory. In this Stewart theory, presence of the photosynthesis enzymes, starch is converted to the glucose. Glucose is converted to starch, starch converted to glucose. So here it is the reversible reactions. Then it has most of the enzyme is converted into the glucose. In when due to all it complete action, that is the photophase action. When the sunlight is utilized the photophase action. Then phosphates or difficult type of the that means glucose and phosphates are involved in the photophase of the action. Then we can pressure, that kind of the pressures will be present in the osmotic type of the potential or osmotic potentials. It's completely negative type of the potential. Then the starch is converted to the glucose and phosphates. That means then a starch is converted into the where the photosynthesis enzyme, it has photosynthesis enzyme. It formation to the glucose, again then formation to the phosphatase. With phosphatase or phosphate. Then it's again, then these both the molecules, that means glucose and phosphate, these also presents in another kind of the phosphatase enzyme. It is glucose to phosphate. Like it is just looking like a series cycle. So example, glucose 1 convert into complete, that is the in phosphate. In the presence of the phosphatase enzyme, in the presence of the phosphatase enzyme, the glucose plus phosphate gives to the glucose and phosphates. It will be used to the glucose and phosphates. Then the reaction is the complete in night and daytime of the presence of the toxins or different type of the enzymes. Then again it's complete converted into the osmotic potential. It's or negative type of the God cells to the stomatals of the closed of the stomatal cells. Then this glucose plus phosphatase, the variations of in the presence of the addition of the phosphate, that is ATP. It's produced to the different kind of the ATP, or it's synthesized ADP plus PI phosphate. Then it's synthesized with the ADP plus PI or phosphate. Then that is involved to the different of the adenine diphosphate, then adenine diphosphate. In adenine diphosphate, it gives to or it is taking to the another kind of the phosphate molecule. So it has adenine diphosphate, that is the two molecules of the phosphate, then another phosphate molecule. Then these three molecules, then two gives is final product, that is the adenine triphosphate. Di means 2, tri means 3. So it is the final product is completely adenine triphosphates. Then the last theory, that is the cyanic theory, then it's according to the pH experiment. Then what is the amount of the pH? That is complete the numerical additions of the pH. Then pH or less, then in presence of the pH, that is the almost all pH 7, it is the concentrated pH. Then pH most of them 6.5. So these are the interactions of the pHs. These the type of the pH stomatoes. There are more of the stomatoes that has due to the that means the dissociations of the stomatoes. The stomatoes open natural or closed is also natural. Then whenever the open at natural or different type of the medium, that is the medium is acidic type of the stomatoes, that is the artificial opening stomatoes. We can find out or we can use the artificial medium. So that artificial medium is provide to the open, its medium is acidic type of, that is the stomato. Whenever the stomato is closed, then we can use it in artificial type of the, or acidic type of the medium we can use. Then when the pH 7 or more, the stomata is completely open. Okay. Then in case the pH is 7 less 7, the stomatos closed. Then most of the pH in more than 7 to more than 7, the stomatos open. Then pH below the 7, then the stomatos closed. That is the open and closed of the stomatos. So ions is also one of the participates in the open and closed stomatos. Then the stomato structures is also different way of the stomato structures. Then the movement of the stomatos are difficult of, that is the different type of the monocots as well as dicot type of the stomatos. So here negative of the potential energy is completely utilized of the pressure potential energy. That is the mechanical pressure potential energy. Then the ions is also most concentrated at the same time. Ions is also most of the involved in this type of the stomatos type of the energy. So this is the one of the important question in exam point of view. Stomato structure or stomatal movement. Anyway, this is the one of the important topic and information about the examination. So structure of the stomato as well as movement of the stomatos. Then in third sem we can study the structure of stomato and types of stomatos. So here mechanism of stomato, that is the variation of, that is the comparison of the type study. Then structure is one of the structure, that is the another thing. Then the movements is the stomato, that is the another thing. So movement or structure anyway, that the thing is different type of the topic things. Then the movement or the same time structure of stomatos, both are comparison to the ions. Then ions will be completely moved to the God cells at the same time subsidiary cells. These ions mostly involved whenever we can pressure, that is the potential pressure then the stomatos completely closed. Then the acidic type of the medium, then the stomatos is mostly closed. Then almost all in night time, then the stomatos is closed, we know. But here the pH is one of the reason. Then the acidic type of the pH at the same time, then pH, most of the pH value in below the pH in 7. Below the 7 pH is also, the stomatos will be closed. Whenever the stomatos is closed, they cannot ion movement, because then whenever the closure of the stomatos, it completely, that means the God cells to subsidiary cells, the starches is not involved or starches is not dissolved. Then did not dissolved starches, they cannot move in the God cells. Then that when the stomatos is completely done, that is the pH is 7. In most of the pH 7, it's going to the, or moreover 7 to above 7, that the stomatos is completely open. When the stomatos is open, that is the God cells to subsidiary cells, that is the starches or sugars are involved. At the same time, the molecules of the ions, different type of the thing of the positive and negative ions. So that positive and negative ions, both ions also involved in the one way of the ion. The ion molecules, it has produced to the sugar molecules or hydrogen molecules, or they can synthesized or they can diffused, or they can split out the negative and the positive separation of the ions. Then that complete, it has an involvement of the starch. Then the starch completely, it has produced to the glucoses. Then the type of the glucose is also involved or present in the photoenzyme or phosphate enzyme. Then whenever the involved in the phosphate enzyme, already it has in the adenine diphosphate. Then the phosphate enzyme is involved. Then again it has produced to the one molecule of phosphate, that is the 1. Then involved again phosphatase enzyme, that is the second molecule of the phosphate, that is the diphosphate. So these both diphosphates are involved in the synthesis. Then again the phosphatase enzyme, it can produce to the triple compound or 3 molecules of the phosphates. That is the adenine triphosphate. Okay, adenine triphosphates. Then the adenine triphosphates, it is completely the energy. Most of the energy levels, it mostly used in energies. Then these are potassium and chloride ions. Then without that means it is in the whenever the closed ions, they can use to the move or formation to the subsidiary cells to the God cells to the subsidiary cells. Again, whenever they close it, then it is a reversible reaction. It is used to the, that means subsidiary cells to the God cells. That ions, when we can pressure, that we can provide a potential pressure, then the ions is moved to the, that is the subsidiary cells to God cells. That is the when the closed stomato. Then when the open stomato, the potassium ions is convert, or potassium ion is moved to the God cells to subsidiary cells whenever the open stomato. Okay, so here the transfer of the ions, the open and closed is most of the important kind of the thing in movement or transfer to the supplements, that means transfer to the ions or movement of the ions. So these are the structure about the mechanical transport at the same time. That means the stomatal movement of the mechanical ions. The ions, most of the used or most of the utilized ion completely in potassium chloride ion. So this potassium chloride ion completely in metallic type of the malleate type of potassium ion. So then these are only then the closed and open. So in open ions it is the natural and that reaction will be going on straightforward reaction. Then whenever the closed type of the stomatos, that reaction is opposite direction of the manner. These are the general typifications or general mechanism of the stomatal movement of or stomatal ion movements.